And recognize Mark Watson, County Manager, for his opening comments.
He's checking on Commissioner Rushing, I believe.
Yeah. Okay, all right. All right, thanks. Mr. Rushing will be here, but he'll be running late. I'm gonna step around here to the podium. Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. It's that time of year when we are beginning our budgeting process, and so wanted to give you some a few things to think about as we move into the presentation this morning. Staff is already in process with our budget this year. Many of the departments and divisions have been meeting to have making strategic plans and thinking about what has transpired over the last few years, what they are focused on now, and what they need to focus on in the future. And as part of our budget presentations to you as we move through these next few months, you will be hearing from each of those different, we'll call them service areas. You will be getting an update from the emergency services service areas, the human services service areas, the community service areas, public works, etc. So we will go through the full gamut with you so that you get an insight into what these different areas are focusing on, the services they're currently delivering, and what they see for the future. But that is what will be transpiring over the next few months. Something I want to bring to your attention this morning as we think about and enter this budget process. I want to draw the distinction between the functions of local government that we are solely responsible for, which will be the topics that we discuss in this budget process. And those broader topics of community interest that we as an organization provide input on, but we have no regulatory authority or funding responsibility for. And sometimes the lines get blurred between those two different things. An example of those differences would be the responsibility that local government has for public safety compared to the state's responsibility to provide transportation infrastructure. And sometimes members of the public will get confused, or they don't fully understand what local government can impact and what we are responsible for, and the things that we just provide input on as part of a larger process. Our budget process will focus on the operational issues and operational needs of Union County local government. There are a number of things that I know that are large topic areas that you are interested in. And we will be covering those as part of this budget process. They will be focus areas for us as we move forward, but I thought I would just highlight for you some of those areas that we will be focusing on in addition to the budget process. This organization is a very dynamic organization, and we have a lot of important topics that are, I will call, in the hopper right now. Many of you have been engaged in these conversations. One of those, and these are not in any kind of pecking order, but one of the things that we will be working on and are working on is the water line extension strategy. That is something this organization is going to be focusing on over the next 12 months. The sewer capacity strategy for allocation and service areas is another important area that we will be focusing on over the next 12 months. This next topic I'll just call master plans. And I thought I would highlight for you all of the master planning processes that are currently in the hopper. They're in process, either in some phase of a process in this organization. Of course, you're familiar with the 2050 plan, but it's the execution of those items that were adopted for the 2050 plan. So that is part of what we'll be focused on over the next 12 months. You have the water sewer master plan. You have a parks master plan for Jesse Helms Park and for Cane Creek Park. And an item that you will be hearing more about as we move through this budgeting process is the space needs assessment for all of the government functions in Union County, and a master plan for how we move forward with that and an adoption of that plan. So in that space needs assessment, that's more than just Union County government. That includes the court system, that includes school administration and the like here in the county seat of Monroe. So you will be hearing more and more about those, but a lot of master planning in the works right now. Long-range capital plans. You're familiar with the capital planning process that has been worked on over the last year. We will be refining that further as we move through this budget process. And then there are the larger questions about how those projects get funded and when they get funded, and the strategic importance to not only this organization but the community for those items. So very, very important in that regard. And while I'm on that topic, in terms of this, the long-term capital planning process for education facilities in the county, tentatively we have a joint session that has been called for on the planning calendar in the month of January between the Board of County Commissioners, the Board of Education, and SPCC to make sure that everybody's on the same page with the capital planning process and what will occur for any bond referendums or potential bond referendums later on in the fall. You know, when you think about those topics, those are some pretty heavy lifts. In addition to all of the other things that local government is responsible for. And while I call out these particular items, this is by no means the definitive list of all of the projects and all of the needs and the focus, strategic focus areas that this organization has. This is just the top tier list. These are the big, broader topic areas, but there are plenty of next level strategic plan efforts that are just as important. So I don't want anybody to think that, because I haven't called out a specific program or topic area that's not as important. They are important, but these are the heavy hitters that we'll be facing over the next 12 months. In addition to all this, and in closing, I would like to just call out to you a couple of items here that you will see will have budgetary impacts going forward. And in some ways, this is just as a reminder of past funding decisions that have been made, and then how those have to be supported in the future going forward. So one of those, and the first one on the list, is the opening of the new sheriff's office and facility. So with the opening of new facilities comes additional expense, et cetera. So that will be open in May. Targeted the opening of the new emergency services facility in June. The opening of the Board of Elections renovation in October. The opening of the Monroe Union Economic Development Authority offices at the Progress Building in October. Those are all important things that were laid out in strategic plans in the past that are now coming to fruition, but will be added operational expenses going forward. So as the organization expands, as our facilities improve, there are some additional costs there, and I'll just call that out as a reminder of the things that we'll be seeing over the next year. With that, I don't know what I just did here, but let's see if I can get this off. There we go. We will continue as we put together this budget for your review. The three things that we have maintained over the last three budgets as our focus as a management group, we are going to maintain the physical discipline. We're continuing to invest in core services, and then, of course, the strategic framework for the internal business processes. You will be hearing a lot specifically about the strategic framework for internal business processes going forward over the next few months. There are a number of projects that specifically relate to that enhance our ability as an organization to improve efficiencies and how we deliver services to the residents of our county. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Blake Hart, who will give you a snapshot of what the economic climate is and the things that we're facing as we move into the budget process.
Thank you, County Manager, and thank you, Commissioner Rape and members of the board. It's my pleasure to be here with you today and discuss important points of the FY23 budget process. Before I get started, the first thing I like to review with staff, with my team, and with the community is to remind everyone that we serve we exist to to carry out the vision of the Board of County Commissioners along with the county manager. And the strategic objectives or the strategic vision as laid out by this board are listed in 5 strategic objectives as public safety, community consensus, economic development, sustainability, and organizational strengthening. And so this year, as we have done every year, as we go through and build the budget process, we will make sure and build a budget that supports these 5 pillars of your strategic vision, and also to hold the departments accountable as far as performance to these objectives to make sure that we are completely in line and in sync with our board. I'd like to begin my presentation, as Manager Watson mentioned, talking about some of the economic factors that exist in our nation and in our community, and that will impact us as an organization, us individually as citizens, and also that will inform decisions and recommendations throughout this budget process. First, I want to talk about unemployment. You'll see 2 charts on this presentation on the slide. On the upper right, you'll see just a general measure of unemployment for the county, for the state, and for the nation. And on the chart on the bottom, you'll see the percent change in unemployment by wage group, specifically in Union County from the January before the pandemic until today. The one thing to keep in mind is you'll see the unemployment in the table above shows a regular unemployment rate, then the pandemic hit in March, and then the spike in unemployment, and then a gradual decrease in unemployment over time to today, where we're at similar levels to where we were before the pandemic. One thing to keep in mind is that the unemployment rate, as measured here and as measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only includes people that are actively looking for employment. And so I believe if you are not actively pursuing a job or looking for employment for 8 weeks, then you roll out of that calculation. And so it can be a bit deceptive, especially in an environment now that we'll talk about where a lot of potential workers are opting out of their workforce, and so that may not show the true story there. And specifically, many low-wage workers are opting out of the workforce. The chart on the bottom right is specifically Union County, and what it shows is that low-wage workers in Union County, the low-wage employment is 20.3% lower than pre-pandemic levels. So if there were 100 workers in Union County in February of 2020, currently there are only 80 low-wage workers now. Now, hopefully, some of that is explained as people took advantage of this time to go to SPCC, improve their skill set, or able to work into a better employment situation, so they've moved into the middle income group. Hopefully, that explains a portion of it, but it doesn't explain all of it. That's a pretty significant number. It also shows that the middle wage worker employment in Union County is 6.6% higher than pre-pandemic levels. And I couldn't add higher level wage earners, but they're even higher than middle income. So what it shows is that folks at the lower end of the income scale are employed at a lower rate, whether it's by choice or by circumstance. That's the case. And many of folks in that lower income level end up being customers of our services at some point throughout the organization. Total employment nationwide is about 3% lower than pre-pandemic. And so there's a general group of people that have not re-entered the workforce, which we know that's the best thing, is to be gainfully employed. Voluntary worker resignations are 12% higher than in the fall of 2019, which is the last time we had kind of a regular year to compare to. And we know that one of the important data points that we've had over the past, certainly the recovery from the pandemic, is the jobs report, or the expectation of how many jobs will be added into the economy each month. And the past few reports have been less than what the expectation has been. The most recent one in December, the expected job gain was about 550,000, and the reported or actual was about 210,000. So that's been kind of a consistent theme over the past few months. And again, those in kind of the professional or business services fare better than those in hospitality and retail sector, even in the holiday season. I want to also talk about a topic that we're all very familiar with by now. Everyone is talking about this. Everyone is experiencing this. Each organization is experiencing this, but inflation is something that's been is at record numbers right now. The 2021 annual inflation, or for the past 12 months, has been calculated at 6.8%, nearly 7%, which is the highest in 30 years, as has been reported. And inflation, as we know, is the general decrease in purchasing power of citizens or of the U.S. dollar, the devaluation of the dollar. And right now, if we had a dollar a year ago, it was worth 100 pennies. Now it's worth 93.2 cents. And so our collective purchasing power has decreased by nearly 7%. The estimate that I saw was that inflation has cost Americans about $175 per month in 2021, just to their general home personal budgets. And one good thing is that wages have increased 5% over the past 12 months, which that's a good indicator that wages are increasing to incentivize workers to come back into the workforce, especially some of the lower paid scales. But when you compare that to a wage increase of 5% and a general inflation of 7%, you're still 2% below even at seeing your wages increase. So that's something to keep in mind too, as we go through the next 12 years to see hopefully that shifts. Some of the hardest hit sectors for inflation, gasoline, of course, is up about 60%. Natural gas is up 25%. That's obviously will be very important as we go through the wintertime to keep our homes warm. 29% for some of my favorite things, eggs, beef, and bacon. Used cars and trucks is up 30%. New vehicles, 31%. Electricity, 6.5%. And then general groceries overall is 6.4%. The forecast from the Federal Reserve is that they expect inflation to fall below 2.5%, sometime near the end of 2023. 2.5% is generally considered a good inflationary number, not too high, not too low. There's a discussion around that that may be too optimistic, that may go into 2024 and even farther, depending on how things work out. The Fed Chair, Powell, announced this week the likelihood to raise interest rates twice in 2022, then 3 times in 2023, and 2 more times in 2024. And since that announcement, he's indicated that may escalate to where they would increase interest rates 3 times in 2022, and then accordingly going forward. That will affect. It could affect, let me say, us locally in our home building, and we'll talk about that on another slide. But that's something to keep in mind, that that inflation is a result of an overabundance of money in the general money supply, and so the Federal Reserve, their job is to try and decrease the money supply so that there's not too many dollars circulating to chase too few goods and services. So to try and balance that out. And some of the actions that they take to do that will disincentivize people to invest in small business, invest in a new home, refinancing their home, buying a new car, those types of things. So it's sometimes a necessary evil to try and decrease the amount of money that's circulating through the economy. Consumer behavior will affect us also. You'll see 2 tables on this slide. The top right one is a representation of the most recent Consumer Confidence Survey, which is a survey done by a group called the Conference Board each month. And they do a random survey of 5,000 people nationwide and ask them what their perceptions are on the overall health of the economy and also their expectations for future of the economy. And then the table on the bottom is a representation of consumer spending in Union County specifically, from the beginning of the pandemic through today. And what these tables tell us is consumer appraisal of current business conditions was less favorable in November than it had been in the past. 17% of consumers said business conditions are good, which is down from 18.3%. So that number is falling. And you can see on the top chart The blue line represents what their perceptions are of the present situation. And you'll see, of course, during the pandemic, it dropped significantly. It kind of came up a little bit. And then I think the big spike is when vaccines were released. People became more optimistic to return to normal. And then you'll see kind of a trending down, too. So also, you'll see that 29% of consumers said business conditions are bad, which is up from 25.7%. So those two things in companionship show that consumers are saying that fewer people are saying that conditions are good, and more people are saying conditions are bad. And I think that that's probably the general consensus. Consumer spending, which is what's represented on the table below, specifically in Union County, shows that since the beginning of the pandemic in January, before the pandemic, consumer spending in Union County is up 27% from that period, which is that's really good. The consumer spending generally represents 70% of total spending throughout the economy. So spending in Union County is continuing to happen, and even post the stimulus that was received by general residents and citizens, spending is still on the upper end. Consumer spending drives local option sales tax revenue that we receive as a county. So that's a primary indicator for me of where our sales tax numbers might be. And that's a very positive indicator. Sales tax, of course, is the county's second largest revenue source. And the question there is there a correlation of the table at the top where things are, people's perception of the current business state and the future business state are trending down? Will that eventually affect the amount of consumer spending in Union County and pull that number down as well? I don't know. I don't think we're quite there yet to have a final number. Fortunately, what I'm going to share with you is a very early projection, and as we go through the process, we'll refine it up or down based on what the best indications are. And in the February timeframe, the State Department of Revenue will release their expectations or kind of their overlook for sales tax, and also the League of Municipalities will do the same thing. And so we'll have those two things to buffer off of and consider for our projections. I want to give you some information on building permit data. Again, this relates back to what I mentioned about interest rates and investment into Union County for construction and housing and updating your home. If you look at the table on the top right, that's the number of building permits issued by fiscal year, so in the time period of July through November of the past 3 fiscal years. And you'll see it broken out by residential and commercial. And so what you'll see is from FY 20, 21, and 22, for the first 5 months of the year, July through November, you'll see there's, in the number of permits, a significant increase for 22 of permits issued. Now, I want to say, I want to qualify this by saying that it could continue to grow through the second half of the fiscal year. It could slow down. It could stop right there. I'm not an expert in that area to say, but just the raw numbers show that there is an escalation in residential permits being issued, and for commercial, you'll see it's down quite a bit. So what that balance will be, what it'll be by the end of the year, I can't say, but this is what it is right now through November. The chart below shows the value of those building permits issued. So if you are issuing a permit to build a house that has a value of $250,000, or a house that's worth $1 million, the number of permits would be the same, but the value of that permit is what would be different and what would add to our tax base eventually upon completion. So you'll see that the same trends follow when you look at the value of the permits at the bottom for both the residential and commercial. And so that's a very positive trend as we go forward through this budget process.
Blake, if I could interrupt
Yeah.
you. Members of the board, when you look at that commercial number there for this year, and it indicates, the number of permits are down, the value of those permits are down. In the Economic Development Advisory meeting this week, we got some insight into that. What they're seeing is that it's the retail sector that is down the most. So in that commercial, lumped into that commercial number are all of the industrial permits for industrial facilities, and then permits for commercial retail facilities. Retail is down, but they are seeing good activity amongst the industrial sector, logistics, and agribusiness. But retail is down significantly. Chairman Rape, you have anything to add to that? Because I know you were in that meeting, but does that summarize it?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
About it.
Yeah, so that gives you some insight as to why, what that difference is. I think from economic development's perspective, the amount of investment that's being made in our county is strong. The outlook is strong. In fact, they tell us that, they are, the number of inquiries and the number of meetings they have with potential industrial clients is high. It's very, very active, but on the retail side, it's way down.
And it would be fair to say, I would imagine, that a good part of that retail drop is being seen in all over the place as a consequence to the coronavirus. Is that pretty accurate?
There's probably some correlations that you could draw there. I think there is some offset to what they're seeing in investment in retail building on the logistics side, particularly on the delivery. That I think Chris Platay calls it the last mile, delivery. So.
And also, it's important, I think, to point out that fiscal year 2020, fiscal year 2021, those are full fiscal years. We're just halfway through fiscal year 2022.
What's represented here is only the time period July through November for each of the years, so it's a true comparison.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question as well? And maybe I'm jumping ahead, but it excludes permits in Monroe and Waxhaw.
Yeah.
I think that would be important for us to see it because, we're all Union County.
Yeah.
And to get an accurate picture, because I know Monroe's growing a lot, and so that would help us understand, because we get tax base from citizens in Monroe as well. So I'd like to see that added.
Sure.
Next time you talk to us.
I'll do that. The reason I didn't include it here is the information coming from those offices is not exactly the same as the way we present it. So we need to do some work to make sure that we're showing apples and oranges, but I'll definitely do my best to get that for you. Yeah, great point.
Blake, for some clarification, these are not total building permits for the year. They're July through November. So like 850, that was just for that period. There was actually more residential permits pulled there.
Yeah.
And to Commissioner Helms's point, we are the catch-all, do-all when it comes to certain services. So it would be important. I know it seems like every time we meet, I see another need for more information to have a clear idea of where we need to be. Thank you.
Sure. And I'll definitely work on that, getting that for you. And you're right, too, that the springtime, my understanding is oftentimes is when the bulk of the permits come or when the construction, gets back into full swing. So I'll show you next time annual data and then broken up to that time period as well. Great. This is a quick snapshot of some of the water and sewer numbers. The table at the top is septic system versus well permits issued. And then the bottom is Union County water versus sewer taps approved. And So this one is for the chart at the top is full year data for FY 19, 20, and 21. And then for 22 is just through yesterday. So that one is showing annual for the first 3 years and to date for the last one. So you'll see that for 19, 20, and 21, the general number of septic system permits increased and kind of leveled off. And then so far there's 783 as compared to 764 the year before. So that could increase. It could, it could exceed that. It could not. I'm not quite sure, but I wanted to show you where we were currently. And then well permits is been pretty consistent around in the above 400, and it's a little bit lower than that trend-wise now, but again, that could increase in the springtime also. All right. I wanted to talk quickly about the real estate market. This is a slide that I've shared before. On the left side is a chart that shows number of sales versus inventory of home sales. The blue bars represent the closed sales in each year, and the orange line represents the inventory available for sale in Union County. And so you'll see that as time progresses, the number of sales increases. In 2020, there was a total of 4,754 sales. In 21, the projected number through the rest of this month is 5,039, so that's an increase, of course. And then the orange line of available inventory or homes for sale that have not sold yet, it continues to decrease and is down now to just over 300 as compared to 450 this time last year. And that speaks to the velocity of home sales in the county. I think anybody that's been trying to buy a home or has trying to sell a home has seen that the number of days on market has decreased quite a bit and the price has increased, which is again is a representation of when there is when the demand for homes is high and the supply for homes is low, well then the price is going to escalate and people are going to be bidding each other to get that property. And that's exactly what we have seen in the market and what's represented in this chart as well. On the right side is average sales price and number of days on market. And again, it tells the same story that the sales price is increasing quite a bit, and the days on market, or the number of days it takes to when you post a home, when you list the home and when you sell it, continues to decrease. And again, that's a reflection of a very strong real estate market. And this isn't surprising because we know that Union County is a destination of choice. We know that as people look to move around, especially now that seemingly more people can work from home, and they're looking for quality of life. They continue to choose Union County. As people migrate within the country and leave areas that are not meeting their needs, they look for areas where there is a high quality of life and better opportunities for them and their families, and regularly they choose Union County. This is kind of the offset to the slide earlier about the Federal Reserve increasing interest rates over the next few years, where I think that because we are an area of choice where people want to be, people are willing to pay a premium to be here, which is what we see, that may insulate us a little bit from interest rate hikes that would deter people from getting mortgages or refinancing homes to come to areas that I think that it may impact us some, but I think that this shows us that we have a strong enough market that we probably won't be too negatively impacted by any of those extraneous influences. Yeah.
One slide.
Sure.
I just want to make sure on septic permits issued, 783 from July to December, right?
Yeah, through yesterday.
That's 130 a month. That's almost 7 a day. I think that'll put it in perspective to us. You know, probably, we hear a lot of stakeholder concerns about why it takes so long. But that's a lot of evaluations of soil for our staff to do. I don't know where they're at on fully staffed, but that's a lot per day.
Sure, definitely.
Okay.
Chairman.
Jerry, Commissioner Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious, on your water and sewer taps, is that strictly residential?
You know, I'm not familiar enough to know. What was shared with me was just general taps, so I don't believe it was broken out between residential and commercial. But I can definitely get back to you with better.
You're referring to subdivisions versus individual taps.
Well, that, and it could be retail establishments, businesses, industry, whatever, so just curious.
I'll see if I can get that broken out and share that with you.
Thank you.
Yep. Great.
Commissioner Rushing.
That sewer system taps at 25, give me, what is that? Give me an idea of what, that's more than 25 homes, right?
I'm not super familiar with some of this data that comes from Public Works. I asked them for a representation of services, and this is what was shared with me. So I don't have the background to drill down on that.
So when I think of sewer system taps, I'm thinking taps
Individual.
onto homes with the
Yeah, yeah.
fees.
So I knew this information would be of interest to y'all. I asked Blake at the very last minute as we did the last review of this presentation to add this slide in there to give you or help us all have a little bit better perspective. It's evident to me that we need some more information relative to these water system taps and sewer system taps. We'll drill into that a little bit more and bring some more information back to you on that.
Great. All right, so now we talked about data points that we're aware of in the nationwide and locally. And now I want to share some information about how they inform or influence some of the decisions that we would make on projections as far as the county budget. The property tax growth amount, I'm beginning the projection of the budget process at 2.9%. That's a number that we've kind of used to start with. The past few years, we've been able to increase that from 2.9 to 3 to 3.1 to 3.2 as the information becomes more accurate, certainly after January when the TR1 is shared with us. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to adjust that number some based on good information that comes from the tax office. But to present a conservative estimate, I wanted to start with 2.9%. Just for informational purposes, for every additional 0.1%, that'll add about $211,000 to the revenue estimate. So if we go from 2.9 to 3, then the revenue estimate would increase by about $212,000 and so forth as far up the ladder as we go. And again, over the past 4 to 5 years, we've grown between 2.9 and 3.2%. So it's kind of on the lower end of where we've grown over time. For sales tax, I have budgeted a 10.7% growth. That's compared to FY20 of 6.3%. In 21, we've budgeted a negative 4.5% because of COVID, and in 22, 15% because we were coming out of that negative territory where we were overly conservative in our estimate. And I'm sure you remember in FY22, we collected above the budget, and we were able to appropriate some of those funds. And to date, we're on a similar trend that we're collecting above budget over the first few months of the year, and we'll see how that pans out over the year. But things are positive right now as far as sales tax. And for each additional 1% of sales tax growth, if we were to increase that, it would bring over $500,000 for each full percentage point. The revenue from building permits and register of deeds is conservatively expected to grow by about 2.5%. We've seen that they've had some significant growth in revenue based on their work and the level of growth in the community. And so that number may change as well. But again, we want to begin the year with a conservative view. We're not planning at this point to issue any unassigned fund balance in 2023. That was fully appropriated in FY22. So there's really not capacity to appropriate any more in FY23 because we did appropriate the full amount in 22 for one-time expenses and to support our capital investment program. And only minor changes across the other revenue categories at this point, and we'll look at those again as we refine this estimate going forward. As far as expense assumptions, employee compensation and benefits is the county's largest expense as far as the general fund or general operating fund. For the increase there in major categories is merit, which is budgeted at 3%. That's an increase of about $2.8 million. If you remember, the enhancement positions in 22 were budgeted to begin in January, so they were only funded for half of the year. And so we'll need to annualize those salaries to budget for a full year for those for FY23. And the cost to do that is just over $800,000. And then also for the class and comp, the implementation of the class and comp program was budgeted for half a year as well. And so to annualize that, to initiate that for a full year, will be an increase of another $1.2 million in 23. So those are quite significant there. For health and dental, I have now a 9% increase for the health and dental fund, which will be just under $2 million. And again, that's will be to support that fund and to stabilize that fund for the future. OPEB, fortunately, our OPEB obligation has decreased slightly for 23, so there won't be a large increase for the OPEB amount in 23. For operating expenses, again, Mark mentioned in his comments the cost for new building operations to operate and open those new facilities coming online. Interfund transfers, that's where we budget for our PAYGO, and also, PAYGO, our one-time enhancements, and business incentive grants. And if you remember in 22, we appropriated a large amount of fund balance for the purpose of PAYGO. And since that's a one-time appropriation, we won't have that in 23. And so the number that's available for PAYGO will come down to more historical numbers, which is around $3 to $4 million, up from 7 in 22. And let's see, and then Inter-Departmental Charges is an increase there based on charges from our enterprise funds, water and sewer and solid waste. And then the contracts, grants, and subsidies is where we pay or we budget for Union County Public Schools, SPCC, our volunteer fire departments, our community partners, and our business partners. And so I have increases to our partners there tied to what our expected increase of the tax base is, or property tax. So what I've said is if we expected 2.9% growth in the value of a penny or in the tax base, then as a starting point, that's what I have budgeted for schools and SPCC and our other partners. Again, I'm sure that'll change, or that'll fluctuate based on need or based on the process, but that's a conservative starting point for 23. And then debt service, there's modest increases in the debt service fund, and so again, as we go forward, we'll update that. Now that we have a projection for county revenues and county expenses, when you put those together, the top line there is the initial projected revenue at just over $304 million, and that's a 0.5% decrease from FY22, and now that's pulling out the one-time money that we used in 22. So that's what's causing the decrease there. And then the initial projected expense is about $306 million. And so that's a 0.2% growth. And again, that's when you pull out those one-time revenues of fund balance appropriation and the one-time expenses of the increase to PAYGO and capital, then when those are pulled out, things kind of balance out. And when you net those two together, that gives us a starting budget position of about a deficit of about $2 million. Again, that $2 million represents about 0.7% of the expected budget amount or the revenue amount, so it's less than 1%. $2 million is a significant amount of money, but fortunately it's less than 1% or just over 0.5%. So it's in a, I would say it's in a manageable range to work on closing that gap. The county manager, when we discussed this, was very proactive to take steps to try and close that gap out of the gate, and has required departments to submit their budget, including a 2% reduction to their operating budget as the first step in the budget process. And so we had our budget kickoff with departments on Monday and shared that with them. And so they're working now through the end of January to make those reductions to their operating budget, to do their part to close that gap starting out in the budget process. We're hopeful that we can get between $500,000 and maybe $750,000 through that process, and that'll go a long way towards closing that gap before we begin looking at other expense increases and then start adjusting the revenues based on those refined and updated projections. So once we do that, the gap will change. It'll decrease, and then one of the biggest pieces of the county budget process is looking at enhancements to departments. We know that the board has been very generous with departments over the past few years as far as granting and approving increases to needed increases, of course, to personnel, equipment, operating costs, and so we've asked the departments or the managers given clear direction to departments that only enhancements that can be justified and detailed as being mission critical to their service area will be considered by management. And so they really have been guided to be a little more strict as what level of scrutiny to put in, what enhancements they're going to even request, or that'll come to the manager for review. So we're trying to be as responsible as possible with the revenue and expense projections, also by requiring departments to tighten their belts at the beginning of the process, and then only submit requests that are absolutely critical to the operations of their service area. I know I've spoken to the sheriff and some of the needs there, and some of the other departments that we certainly will focus on and do the very best possible to meet the needs of the community. But hopefully we'll be able to balance the budget again in a positive way. This is a snapshot of the first draft of our budget calendar. So this will guide us through the budget process. Of course, some dates might change, topics of presentations will likely change, but this is just a general overview. And again, on the 13th, on Monday, we had our budget kickoff with departments. Departments will submit their budget requests by January 31st. After that, the budget office will review and analyze those requests. Then we will package all that information into the county manager's budget workbook, and that will be the reference document to go through the process to review the state of departments and also review their enhancement requests. Then that'll be shared with the county manager and his management team. They'll do a lot of work to go through and further analyze and gather more information and consider requests by SPCC, schools, and our business partners. And then the county manager will put all that together in a proposed budget that will be presented hopefully the week of May 23rd. Looking forward to a budget adoption in early June of '22. And
Blake, if I could.
Sure.
Go back. So just to reiterate a point I made earlier, you can expect some communication relatively soon related to a joint meeting between the Board of County Commissioners, the Board of Education, and SPCC regarding the capital plan, the immediate request, education capital plan, and the immediate request for this year,
and what future years looks like, and discussion of funding sources for those education capital needs. So just be aware and expect that during the month of January, probably toward the latter part of January.
Thank you. That concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll be happy to respond to any questions or thoughts you may have.
Chair. Looks like things gonna be tight a little bit. So would it be, and earlier it was mentioned about potential bonds. And a bond would net a tax increase, right? Because the revenue's not there to cover it. Is that a fair statement?
I would defer to Beverly to give her thoughts on that.
Future.
Future bond.
Yes, would require tax.
Repeat that what she said so it goes for record.
She said a future bond would require a tax increase, right?
Okay.
I think bonds at the levels of funding that are being requested in the education capital plans would likely result in some kind of a need for additional funding.
That's a nice way of putting it, isn't it?
Thank you.
Commissioner Simpson.
I was just going to say, I believe it's been our, I believe we always, as a part of the language, indicate that should you approve a bond, that the cost of that bond goes directly to your tax bill, so.
And fortunately, the way that the debt service fund has been structured in '22, it'll be very clear to taxpayers that if there is an increase because of bonds, they'll clearly see that increase on their tax bill specifically for that debt.
Any other questions? If not, Michelle?
Great. Yeah, thank you.
All right, just to wrap things up, our next steps, and some of this is a repeat of what you heard from both Mark and Blake, but we would like to bring to you, and we plan to bring to you at your first meeting in January, a schedule of budget workshops that would take place on the second Monday of each month. That would be like a 3 o'clock workshop, as we've done the last couple of years. And that's where we will go through topics of your interest. So if there are things that you know, like right now, that you really want us to spend some time on, we would like to hear those. We'll follow up with you if you haven't shared anything with us directly. And then specifically, we're going to have department and program overviews that focus on recent accomplishments, current key initiatives for FY23 budget, and any future issues, challenges, or opportunities that they may have. So we're working on those schedule, and we'll be sending out a template to staff later today so that they can start working on those and be ready to come to present to you. So with that, happy to answer any questions. And again, if you have specific topics of interest that you know today that you want us to start looking at, we would love to hear those, but we can also follow up with you later about those. Thank you.
Commissioner Rushing.
Apologize again for being late today. On this presentation, we were looking at the number of new residential construction as being quite high. We talked, so what kind of growth numbers are we going to have with sales tax, with property tax base? If we could start out with that in each meeting, like an update, and very clearly spelled out that how much more are we going to be making from the year previous, and how much more we're going to be spending. So not just projections or updated projections, but actual, what do we believe we were going to have last year versus what we're doing from last year. So anything updated or anything changed that we changed in one of our meetings, just, what did we see last year versus what's going to happen next year? Very clearly spelled out so that people at home can understand, is our spending going up $5 million? Is our spending going up $10 million? $20 million. How much is our spending going up? There was some confusion on the tax bill. I know one of the former county commissioners from years ago sent us a request wanting to know because it looked like we were spending $84 million more or something than we did the year before. And that was just a misunderstanding in the way the numbers were figured. So something very clear that people can see at home as to, how much money more are we making? Because if we have, I'm just adding up the sales tax revenue, just the difference between last year and this year, is that going to make up that $2 million difference that he was talking about? So those kind of things, just make sure that we, what we had last year versus what we're going to be doing this year, very clearly spelled out would be.
We will update our projections on a regular basis and can show you to-date expenditures, which we'll start doing that after the first of the year. After we've got 6 months of experience, that's when you should expect to start seeing those presentations from Blake and Beverly.
And everything together would be nice, just like, schools, everything together in one package, not all split out in different areas, everything together. How many more millions of dollars did we make? How many millions of dollars more are we planning to spend?
Well, I think the way that we prepared the budget for this year, that sets you up to, it's all only in one place, except for that debt fund being separate, and so schools are all included in the general fund, so that's how you will see everything rolling out in the future.
And we'll be doing, along with this, we'll be doing public works as well?
Yes.
Okay. And same thing like that, how much more are we making, how much more are we spending? And, we talked about the bond issues, if we have bond issues. Also, the cost of, new projects that we approve without a bond on the board in public works, how much is that going to raise the rates? What are the costs of raising those? We've done those before in the past, so make sure it's clearly spelled out.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
One more thing, Michelle, just to get it into the hearing. The sales tax is split up many ways, isn't it? I mean, if we see a $2 or $3 million increase, is that our part, or is that before an increase in sales tax, then it goes out to all the tax districts, including us?
Yes, the answer is yes, but what you see from Blake is what we're applying to the general fund.
What would be our part?
What would be our portion?
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And then Commissioner Rushing, on those building starts, I have found this in past, if those houses are not issued a certificate of occupancy by January 1, they're not taxed for that budget year. In other words, a house under construction, we don't do partial valuations, I don't think. I guess we'd have to ask.
Well, we can clarify that with Van.
But you see what I'm saying?
Right. I think you're accurate, but I want to get the exact description of how that works. You can't.
Sometimes there's a 1-year lag on that coming into the general fund.
Right, but I think you would see the 1-year lag from the year previous.
That's true.
So it all works out in the wash. That brings up an interesting point. I kind of missed the half of that, when we were talking about the houses coming in and the increase there and the decrease in retail. It was quite a jump. It seemed like 54% in houses, but it was mentioned that Monroe and Waxhaw was not included in those numbers. Is that correct? So Monroe nor Waxhaw was included. And with the amount of growth going on in Monroe right now, that's a substantial increase. So, I mean, that, if we're not including those, like I think the chairman had asked for that information, if we're not including those, that could be a substantial increase in the value of properties in the county.
So as Blake said, we'll get that information, just to clarify for everybody, the reason that you see it that way is this is the part that we control. So we have control of all that data. Monroe and Waxhaw issue their own permits.
Right.
So that's why you see a distinction for those two particular towns. We do everything else. So he and his staff will need to do some kind of cleaning up of the data to make sure it's apples to apples. And also, I would just remind you that what you saw today was just a portion of a year, so that you had a point in time comparison. And in January or early February, he'll show you the annual numbers so that you see that.
Well, those numbers are included in our projections for revenue. They're not. When we do our revenue projections, do we do them based off our numbers or our numbers and those numbers in those towns?
So he's given you a projection on the tax base, is the entire tax base.
Right.
And that's really based on trend. So, I mean, we use that to look at how much we think. I think he showed you it's, over the last several years, 2.9 to 3.2% growth is what we've seen in the base. So we're starting at 2.9, and we'll continue to kind of massage that. And he also showed you what each tenth of a percentage would gain you in revenue if we saw additional growth in that base.
Because we're conservative, and I appreciate
Right.
that we're conservative with our numbers, that we estimate on the low side on the revenue coming in and estimate on the high side on the expenses sometimes, but, you know, if we're gonna threaten a tax increase for a bond vote when it's covered in growth revenues, more than covered in growth revenues, I just want to make sure that we're not doing that as well, that we don't raise taxes just so we can spend the money, just so we can raise taxes for a bond. That we don't budget to spend the money just to make up and charge people a tax increase for bond votes for schools. Okay? Thank you.
I hear what you're saying there. I don't know if you got here, there is some pay-go capital money put in there in the next budget. I believe I saw 7 million. Am I correct there, Blake?
7 million that we use in one-time dollars for current year.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, there's some things that will pop up that we don't know, but we do budget some for that, and so,
Yes, absolutely.
and if we try to take that down to where there is no increase, which I think we're all hoping and wanting, no tax increase, so, all right,
You want to put
anybody
that in the form
else?
of a motion, Mr. Chairman?
Sir,
While they're working on it, you can put that in the form of a motion if you'd like.
okay.
I hope that you can tell by what we presented that that's what we're working toward.
Yeah, I think that's what you said.
All right, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
If there's no further comments, I need a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
one more item, if I might.
Okay.
Just make the board aware that the Village of Marvin, you've seen the emails requesting a joint meeting with the Board of County Commissioners for the purposes of discussing some transportation funds for some projects they have in the Village of Marvin. I received an email on Wednesday from the village administrator who would, after thinking about it, she says that she would like to invite all of you to join the Village Council at their budget retreat on February the 18th at the Firethorn Country Club, and lunch would be provided. We'll get try to tie down the times. It sounds like that the discussion that they would like to have with the Board of County Commissioners could probably be maybe around lunch, but we'll tie down those times. If there are no objections, I'll go ahead and respond to her that we'll plan that for February 18th. If any of you have any conflicts with that date or know of a reason that we need to meet on a different date, if you could let me know by the end of the day, and if I haven't heard from you, then we'll go ahead and move forward. We're planning for February the 18th in a joint meeting with the Village of Marvin Council at their budget retreat, at least for a portion of that day.
Any other comments? I follow two good chairmans, but the one thing they didn't say, this is like it pulling out on 74. Look both ways when you're running this meeting, because if I pass over you a couple of times when you want to speak, I don't mean to. With that being said, I need a motion to adjourn the special meeting and call for a vote. Got a motion? All in favor? Aye.